Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really dramatic story about how a victorious army, fresh off an incredible win, was suddenly and shockingly defeated, all because of a hidden crime.
So picture this. After a miraculous victory at the heavily fortified city of Jericho, the Israelites looked absolutely unstoppable. They were on a roll. But then their momentum comes to this sudden, brutal halt at the tiny town of A, where their army gets completely wiped out. You can imagine the shock. The people were stunned, their confidence completely shattered. And their leader, Joshua, is just desperate for answers. How could this possibly happen? Well, it turns out their greatest enemy wasn't some outside army, but was actually hiding right there, inside their own camp. Okay, so let's get into this mystery. The story picks up right after that humiliating defeat. Israel's leaders are in total despair, and Joshua is just crying out to God, trying to figure out how victory could turn into failure so quickly. And God's response? It's immediate and it is direct. He reveals that the reason for their defeat wasn't a bad military strategy or a stronger enemy. No, it was a spiritual problem. Someone had broken their sacred covenant with him.
Now, what's really fascinating here is this idea of corporate responsibility. Today we tend to think very individualistically, but in this covenant community, one person's actions had consequences for everybody. One single person broke faith, and the entire nation suffered for it. So this revelation kicks off a huge, solemn investigation to find the enemy within, to find the person who is the source of all this trouble for the entire camp. And the way God sets this up is just wow. It's a methodical, deliberate process that slowly narrows down the search. It goes from the whole nation to a single tribe, then down to a specific clan, then a household, and finally to just one man. You can just feel the tension building with every single step. But here's the thing. This slow zooming in process wasn't just for dramatic effect. The source material explains that this was actually an act of grace. At each stage, when his tribe was called, then his clan, then his household, the guilty person was being given a window, an opportunity to come forward and confess on his own terms. But he just stays silent, obstinately silent, until the very end, when there's nowhere left to hide, and the spotlight of God points directly at him, a man named Achan. With no escape, Achan finally confesses, and his words are just hauntingly familiar, aren't they? They echo that original story of human failure back in the Garden of Eden. He saw, he coveted, and he took. And what did he take? Beautiful, valuable things from the spoils of Jericho, plunder that he was explicitly forbidden to touch. These were treasures from that old, doomed world that he just couldn't let go of. Okay, so here's why this was such a big deal. These items were considered cherem, which means they were devoted either for total destruction or directly for God's treasury. By taking them for himself, Achan basically put that same devoted to destruction label on himself, and because of that, on the entire camp. He made Israel the enemy. Now, this is where the source material gets really brilliant, because it illustrates this exact moment by putting Achan's choice in stark contrast with another person from the Jericho story, a woman named Rahab. And this comparison just lays the whole theme bare. Achan was the ultimate insider, born into the covenant, but he despised it. Rahab was a total outsider from a city that was devoted to destruction, and yet she was desperate to get in. They both hid something, right? But their motives and their outcomes could not be more different. It just goes to show that what really matters isn't your background, it's your personal choice. So what happens next? Well, once that hidden sin was finally confronted and removed, the community was purified. They could finally move on from this massive failure. And then, in this really fascinating twist, God turns their initial defeat into a strategic advantage. He tells them to use the enemy's newfound overconfidence against them. They set up an ambush, and it leads to a decisive victory in the second battle at Ai. The place where all of these traumatic events happened was given a name, the Valley of Achor. And that literally translates to the Valley of Trouble, a permanent reminder of the disaster that hidden sin can cause. But hold on, because that is not the end of the story.
Centuries later, the prophet Hosea would look back at this exact location, this place of failure and shame, and use it as a powerful symbol of redemption and hope. I mean, how powerful is that? This story shows this profound truth that God can take our greatest failures, our deepest valleys of trouble, and actually transform them into a brand new future, a new possibility, a door of hope. And so, the story leaves us all with a really challenging question to chew on. What's the enemy within for us? What hidden things, like greed, or pride, or selfishness, might be preventing us, or our families, or communities, from moving forward into the victories we're meant to have?